Well, hello everybody and welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Now today I'm going to be making a white bloomer loaf, but I'm going to use some cheddar cheese inside it, so it's going to be a cheese bloomer. So this is going to be rather a large loaf, sort of oval in shape probably, and it takes quite a while to make, but it's very simple. I have done this once before, a couple of weeks ago when I was in Canada, and it worked quite well. The cheese seemed to completely disappear during the kneading of the dough, but the flavour came through once it was baked. So for the ingredients, I have 675 grams of strong white bread flour. I've actually got very strong here, but strong white is good. And I have, and that works out at about 6.5 cups, slightly less than 6.5 cups I think. And then I have 210 grams of grated cheddar cheese, and that works out at 2 cups. I have 430 millilitres of water, lukewarm, about 43 degrees Celsius, 110 Fahrenheit, and I've put 100 millilitres of that into this bowl, into this dish. I have 7 grams, 1 packet of active dried yeast, and I have 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Now I've actually put a pinch of sugar in this 100 millilitres of water, and I'm going to add the yeast into that, and I'm going to leave that to activate for about 10 minutes. And when that's activated, I'll come back and we'll go on and make our dough. Our yeast is activated quite nicely, so that's ready to go in. So what I'm going to do is put the salt into the flour and give that a mix around with a whisk. And I'm going to add the cheese in at this stage as well. And then I'm going to stir that around. And then I'm just going to make a well in the centre and pour in my yeast mixture and the other 330 millilitres of water. And I'm going to bring that together until it starts to clump. And the reason I'm doing this by hand is that there's a lot of mixture here, and I don't think my stand mixer is large enough to take such a large amount of dough. Now I have extra flour available to put on my counter if I need it. So with that mixture pulled together, I need to start kneading that, and I need to knead that for 10 minutes until it's all come together and it's springy to the touch and not too tacky. At the moment it's very sticky, as you can see, but it will, with kneading, it will start to come together. And then once it's sort of coming together, put it onto the counter and knead it for the full 10 minutes. And I think that's actually good enough to go straight onto the counter now. So I'm going to scrape that out of the bowl. And if as you're kneading things get sticky, as they're likely to do, just add some more flour, a little at a time. You don't want to put too much in. So then just knead that, just like that, and after 10 minutes it should all be a very nice dough. So I've kneaded this for 10 minutes and it's actually quite nice now, and it does spring back a little bit if I press it. So what I'm going to do is form that into a ball like that, and the cheese has almost disappeared. Just a few little bits I can see, the rest is worked into the dough. So what I'm going to do is put that face down into a greased bowl, then I'm going to turn it over like that so that the whole surface is covered with the grease, and then I'm going to cover that with plastic wrap, and I'm going to leave it to prove until it's doubled in size, which is likely to take a couple of hours. Then I'm going to come back and I've got to knead it for another 5 minutes and then prove it again for a couple of hours. So I'll be back with you when this is doubled in size and we go on to knead it for another 5 minutes. Well, I'm back with you, and it's only been about an hour and a half, but my dough has doubled in size. Now if you can hear some trickling, that's my aero garden just passing water through it. So what I'm going to do is tip this out onto the work surface, and I'm going to knead it for another 5 minutes. Now I'm actually going to put a little bit of flour on the work surface just so that it doesn't stick, and I'll flour my hand so it's easier to tip out smoothly. There we are. So I'm going to just knock the air out of that, and then I'm going to knead it for 5 minutes. And so how I knead this is I hold with my left hand and push with my right hand, folding it up as I pull it back like that. So I end up with a log again. Then I turn it 90 degrees and I do the same. And I keep doing that, and it's now been about 5 minutes. So that's actually as much as I need to do, and I'm going to format again into a rough ball shape, and I'm going to put that back in my bowl, and I'm going to cover that again and allow it to double in size once more. And then once it's doubled in size, I'm going to knead it for another 5 minutes, and then we're ready almost to shape it. So I'll be back with you once it's doubled in size again. Okay, so our dough has now doubled in size again, as you can see, and I'm going to tip it out onto the work surface. Like that. Knock the air out of it again, and I'm going to knead it for another 5 minutes, just like before. So I'm going to leave that to rest for another 5 minutes now, and then in 5 minutes I'm going to roll it out to about 12 inches by 6 inches, or flatten it so it's about that shape. So I will be back in 5 minutes and we'll start to shape the dough. I let the dough rest for about 5 minutes, and what I've done is I've just used my hands to flatten it, so it's about 12 inches on this long side here, and probably about 8 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold up that 1/3 of it like that, and then I'm going to fold the other third on top of it like that. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of flour and put that along there. And I'm just going to turn that over onto that flour like that. And then I'm going to leave that to rest for 15 minutes. Now while it's resting, I will preheat my oven to 220 Celsius, 190 Celsius with the fan, 430 Fahrenheit, and I've got a baking tray already prepared with some parchment paper. You don't need the parchment paper, but I'm going to use it because I always use it. And I just need to make sure that that is going to fit on my baking tray as far as the length is concerned, because it will expand once it's started to bake. So I'm going to leave that for 15 minutes, and then I'll come back and we'll go on to the next step. It's been 15 minutes and our dough has spread a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to carefully transfer it onto my baking tray. Like that. And then I'm going to push it back into shape. Like that. And I'm going to leave it for another 15 minutes. And then I have 2 tablespoons of water and half a teaspoon of salt here, and I'm going to brush that over it, and then I'm going to give it some cuts with a knife. And I'm also going to get a tray of water ready to put into the oven as well, so that during the baking that creates some steam. So I'll be back in 15 minutes when this is ready to be brushed, slashed, and then put into the oven. So having transferred it to the baking tray, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 5 or 6 slashes into it with a very sharp knife. Like that. And I'm going to cover it with a clean towel and leave it for another 10 minutes. That's while the oven is preheating. Then it will be ready to brush with a solution of water and salt, and I'll get a pan of water ready to go into the bottom of the oven to create some steam while it's baking. So I'll be back in 10 minutes time when it's ready to go into the oven. It's been about 10 minutes and the oven is now at temperature. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lightly brush the dough with the salted water. And this will help it to crisp up a little bit, but that crispness will go soft after the loaf has been baked and it's been allowed to cool down. So it'll be a nice crust, but it will be a soft crust. And I have a tray of water on the bottom of the oven already, ready for this to go in. So with that, like that, I'm going to pop this into the oven, and I'm going to bake it for 35 to 45 minutes, by which time it should have risen and the top should have browned and crisped. You'll know whether it's baked after 35 minutes if you tap the underside and it sounds hollow. If it doesn't sound hollow, you can bake it for a little bit longer. If it does sound quite hollow but it's soft, you can actually probably just turn it over and turn the oven off. But I would test the temperature of mine internally, and that should go up to about 93 degrees Celsius, 200 Fahrenheit, and that will mean that I know that the dough's cooked inside. And so if it doesn't sound hollow underneath, I will simply turn the oven off and leave it in the oven for another 5 to 10 minutes upside down, so that the underside goes firm as well. So after that 35 to 45 minutes, I'll take it out and let it cool down. Then I'll come back and show you the result. Well, our loaf has baked, and I baked mine for exactly 35 minutes. And as you can hear, it's quite crispy on the top, and it's still very, very hot because it's only been out of the oven for a minute. But I thought I would bring you back to show you that the underside is actually quite nice and crisp as well. So I'm going to let that cool down, and when it's cooled down I'll come back and we'll cut it. Well, I'm back and the loaf has now cooled down, so I've cut it, and as you can see it looks very good, and the crust will soften. It's still a bit firm, but it will soften a little bit more, and it's ideal this for sandwiches and such like, and I can just smell a bit of the cheese, so I'm just going to cut a small piece of this and taste it. As I said earlier, in the kneading, the cheese sort of disintegrates and gets absorbed into the dough, but once it's baked you can definitely taste that cheese. That's a very good loaf of bread. So that's going to be it for this recipe. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please give me the thumbs up below the video and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an eye that you can click on, which will take you to the recipe for this loaf, and I'll put a link to it below the video as well. And I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future, so until then, happy baking.